The day Sheriff Danner ordered his K-9 to attack Marlene Jefferson was the day Willow Creek's carefully constructed lies began to unravel. For 15 years, the elderly black woman had lived quietly at the edge of town, tending her garden, while keeping deadly secrets buried beneath her property. The police expected their trained dog to intimidate her. Instead, it defied commands and bowed at her feet. As phones captured the moment, no one realized they were witnessing the first move in a dangerous game. Marlene wasn't just an old woman with a mysterious past. She was Major Jefferson, former Special Forces K-9 commander, and the chemical weapons cover-up she'd been silently guarding was about to explode into the open. The powerful men who thought they could erase her would soon learn that some soldiers never stop fighting, even when the battlefield changes. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek, a small southern town where secrets lingered like the morning fog. Marlene Jefferson stood in her overgrown garden, her weathered hands gently pruning a rosebush. At 78, her movements were deliberate but strong, her back straight despite the years weighing on her shoulders. Beside her, a large German shepherd mix watched attentively, his ears perked up at every sound beyond the old wooden fence. "It's all right, Shadow," Marlene whispered, her voice low and melodic. Just the Williams boy cutting through again. From across the street, 10-year-old Tommy Davis watched through a gap in his own fence, eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "That's the weird old lady," he whispered to his friend Jake. "My mom says she never talks to anyone. Some kids say she's a witch." Jake nodded solemnly. "My dad says she's dangerous, that she did something really bad a long time ago." The boys ducked down as Shadow's head turned in their direction, his dark eyes seeming to pierce right through the fence boards. Marlene sighed, patting her companion's head. "Let them be, Shadow. They don't know any better." She straightened, up slowly, looking at her modest one-story home. The white paint was peeling in places, but the structure was sound, just like her. As she walked up the porch steps, she paused, sensing something different in the air today. A heaviness, a warning. At the Willow Creek Diner, the morning shift was in full swing. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air as Officer Rick Danner slid into a booth where 3 other police officers were already seated. "Well, look who decided to show up," Officer Pete Lawson said with a smirk. "Daddy let you out to play with the big boys today?" Rick forced a smile, ignoring the jab. At 28, he was the youngest officer on the force and the only one who hadn't grown up in Willow Creek. But more importantly, he was Sheriff Thomas Danner's son, a fact no one would let him forget. "You missed all the excitement, officer," Daniel said, stirring his coffee. "Mitchell Crane just announced his new development plan, going to put Willow Creek on the map." "The mall project?" Rick asked, reaching for a menu. "I thought that was still in the proposal stage." "Not anymore. Got approved last night. Only problem is that old Jefferson woman. Her property sits right where the main entrance should be." Daniels leaned in, lowering his voice. "Your dad's pretty worked up about it." Before Rick could respond, the diner's door swung open, and Sheriff Thomas Danner strode in. At 55, he commanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that rarely smiled. The conversations dimmed as he approached their table. "Rick," he said, voice gruff. "Need you to ride along with me this afternoon. Got a situation developing." "What kind of situation?" Rick asked. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. "The kind where you do what you're told. You've been too soft lately. Time to toughen up." The other officers exchanged knowing glances as Sheriff Danner turned and walked toward the counter to grab coffee. "Daddy's boy gets a special assignment," Lawson whispered with a grin. Rick clenched his jaw but remained silent. Across town, in a gleaming office with floor-to-ceiling windows, Mitchell Crane studied a large map spread across his desk. At 47, Crane had the polished look of success, tailored suit, perfect teeth, and cold eyes that calculated everything in terms of profit. His finger traced the outline of a property marked in red. "Jefferson," he muttered, shaking his head. "Stubborn old woman." His assistant, Sarah, stood nervously by the door. "We've made 3 offers, Mr. Crane. Each one higher than the last. She won't even discuss it." "Everyone has a price," Crane replied, straightening up. "Or a breaking point." He picked up his phone. "Get me Sheriff Danner. And file those nuisance complaints we discussed. Loitering, suspicious activity, excessive, noise, whatever sounds plausible." "But sir," Sarah hesitated, "there haven't been any actual complaints from neighbors." Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then I suggest you find some neighbors willing to complain. Or find another job." Sarah hurried out. Crane turned to look out of the window. In the distance, he could just make out the edge of Marlene Jefferson's property, a small obstacle in his grand vision, but an obstacle nonetheless. Back at her home, Marlene sat at an old writing desk, a single lamp illuminating the paper before her. Shadow lay at her feet, his breathing steady and comforting. Her hand moved slowly across the page. "My dear James." It's starting again. The whispers, the stares. "A man came by yesterday, all smiles and promises. Said he wanted to buy my home for future development. When I refused, the smile vanished. I know that look. I've seen it before. I may need your help soon. The shadows are growing longer." With hope, Marlene. She folded the letter carefully, sliding it into an envelope. After writing the address, she placed it in her pocket to mail tomorrow. Then, with Shadow following closely, she moved to a locked door at the end of the hallway. The key hung on a chain around her neck. Inside, the room was meticulously organized. Military medals displayed in a glass case, photographs in precise rows on the wall, and a large shadow box containing what looked like patches and insignia. Marlene's fingers traced the glass over a Medal of Honor at the center of the display. Below it, a small brass plate read, "Major Marlene Jefferson, Special Forces K9 Unit." "They're coming, old friend," she whispered to Shadow. "Just like before." Shadow nuzzled her hand, his eyes reflecting understanding beyond what most would attribute to a dog. Before leaving, Marlene lit a small candle beneath the metal, a ritual that brought her comfort. As she closed and locked the door, she didn't notice the car parked across the street, or the man inside, taking photographs. The next morning, Anna Miller arrived early at the Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic, where she worked as an intern. At 26, she was ambitious and compassionate, qualities that sometimes put her at odds with the clinic's more profit-minded owner. She was surprised to find Shadow already there, held by a concerned Marlene. The dog had a small gash on his front paw. "Ms. Jefferson," Anna said warmly, "what happened to Shadow?" "Found some broken glass by my fence this morning," Marlene replied, her voice steady but her eyes wary. "Strange place for glass to be. Shadow stepped on it during our walk." Anna led them to an examination room, kneeling to check the wound. "It's not too deep, but we should clean it properly." As she worked, Anna couldn't help noticing how Shadow responded to Marlene's slightest gestures, sometimes before she even made them verbally. "He's remarkably well trained," Anna commented. A ghost of a smile crossed Marlene's face. "We understand each other." Anna wrapped the paw carefully. "All done. He should be fine in a few days." Marlene nodded, reaching into her purse. Anna noticed her hands, strong, calloused, not the hands of an ordinary elderly woman. "Are you by chance Rick Danner's girlfriend?" Marlene asked suddenly. Anna blinked in surprise. "Yes. How did you know?" "Small town," Marlene said simply. Then more quietly, "Be careful, young lady. This town has deep roots in shallow soil." Before Anna could ask what she meant, Marlene and Shadow were gone, leaving Anna with an unsettled feeling and a growing curiosity. That evening, as Anna recounted the strange encounter to Rick over dinner at her small apartment, his expression grew troubled. "Dad's been talking about her," he admitted. "Crane wants her property for the mall entrance. Claims she threatened him when he made an offer." Anna frowned. That doesn't sound like her. She was dignified, almost military in her bearing. Rick shrugged. "Dad says she's been trouble for years. Keeps to herself, won't participate in town affairs. He thinks she's hiding something." Or maybe she just values her privacy, Anna countered. Not everyone needs to be the center of attention. Rick sighed, reaching for her hand. Just be careful. Around her, okay? Something's brewing and I don't want you caught in the middle. Are you worried about me or worried about crossing your father? Anna asked pointedly. The question hung in the air between them, unanswered. As night fell over Willow Creek, Marlene sat on her porch, shadow at her feet. The stars were bright above, but she sensed the storm coming. Tomorrow would bring trouble. She could feel it, in her bones, the same way she'd felt it before deployments years ago. Inside her locked room, the candle still burned beneath the Medal of Honor, a small flame of resistance against the darkness gathering outside. The next morning dawned with an unusual stillness over Willow Creek. Marlene Jefferson was in her garden earlier than usual, harvesting herbs before the day's heat set in. Shadow paced restlessly at the edge of the property, his body tense. I know, Marlene murmured. They're coming today. Sure enough, at precisely 10 o'clock, a police cruiser pulled up in front of her house. Sheriff Thomas Danner stepped out, his uniform pressed and badge gleaming in the sunlight. Behind him, looking considerably less comfortable, was his son, Officer Rick Danner. Shadow's growl was low and warning as the two men approached the gate. Marlene placed a calming hand on his head, but didn't silence him. Morning, Ms. Jefferson. Sheriff Danner called out, his voice carrying a false cheerfulness. Mind if we have a word? Marlene straightened up slowly, brushing soil from her hands. What can I do for Willow Creek's finest today? The sheriff pushed the gate open without waiting for an invitation. We've received some complaints from your neighbors. Thought we should check in. Rick followed his father, his eyes taking in the meticulously kept garden, herbs, vegetables, and flowers growing in organized sections. Nothing like the overgrown mess that had been described in the complaint. What sort of complaints? Marlene asked, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. Sheriff. Danner consulted his notepad. Noise disturbances, suspicious activity at odd hours, possible code violations regarding your property upkeep. He gestured vaguely at the yard. That sort of thing. Rick shifted uncomfortably. He'd read the complaint report that morning and found it oddly detailed yet vague, as if written by someone who'd never actually been to the property. I see, Marlene said, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. And which neighbors reported these issues? That's confidential information, ma'am, the sheriff replied. We're just here to investigate. Shadow moved closer to Marlene, his growl deepening as Sheriff Danner took another step forward. You might want to control your dog, Ms. Jefferson, the sheriff said, his hand moving instinctively toward his holster. Shadow, stay, Marlene commanded, her voice suddenly sharper, more authoritative. The dog stopped growling but remained alert, his eyes fixed on the sheriff. Dad, Rick interjected, I'm not seeing any of the issues mentioned in the report. The yard is well maintained and… Officer Danner, his father cut him off. Why don't you check the perimeter while I continue speaking with Ms. Jefferson? Rick hesitated, then nodded, moving away to walk the property line. As soon as he was out of earshot, the sheriff's demeanor changed. Let's cut to the chase, Jefferson. You know why we're really here. Marlene's expression remained neutral. I believe I do. Mr. Crane sent you. Mitchell Crane is bringing progress to this town, the sheriff said, lowering his voice. Jobs, tax revenue, tourism, but you're standing in the way. My land is not for sale, Marlene replied simply. Not to Mr. Crane, not to anyone. The sheriff took another step closer. You know, I looked into your background. Not much there, almost like someone erased it. Makes a man wonder what you're hiding. Marlene didn't flinch. I'm not hiding anything, Sheriff. I'm simply living my life. A life that could be made very difficult, he warned. Small towns have long memories, especially for outsiders who don't cooperate. Shadow's growl returned, louder this time. The sheriff reached for his radio. This is Danner. Send the K9 unit to 1427 Maple Street. Possible aggressive animal situation. Marlene's eyes narrowed. That's unnecessary, Sheriff. Just a precaution, he replied with a cold smile. Our K9 officer might have some advice on handling your pet. Rick returned just as a second police vehicle pulled up. Officer Daniels stepped out, leading a muscular Belgian Malinois on a leash. "What's going on?" Rick asked, looking between his father and Marlene. "Ms. Jefferson's dog is showing aggressive tendencies," Sheriff Danner explained. "Officer Daniels is here to assist." Rick frowned. "Dad, Shadow was just protecting his owner. He's not being aggressive now." But Sheriff Danner ignored him, gesturing for Officer Daniels to approach. "Ms. Jefferson, we need you to step away from the dog." "No," Marlene said firmly. "There's no need for this escalation." Shadow stood protectively in front of Marlene, his posture alert but controlled. Officer Daniels smirked. "You heard the sheriff, ma'am. Step away from the dog or I'll have to demonstrate what a properly trained police K9 can do." For a brief moment, something flashed in Marlene's eyes. Not fear, but recognition. A memory. Afghanistan, 2003. Major. Marlene Jefferson in full combat gear, leading a team through a village. A military K9, a Belgian Malinois much like the one now facing her, trotting obediently at her side. The dog alerting to an IED seconds before her team would have triggered it. Lives saved by the bond between handler and animal. The flashback vanished as quickly as it had come. Marlene's stance shifted subtly, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable tone of command. "I will not step away from my dog, officer, and you will not release yours." Sheriff Danner's face reddened. "That's it. You're interfering with police business." He turned to Daniels. "Show her what happens when people don't cooperate." Rick stepped forward. "Dad, this isn't right." The complaint was, "Stand down, Officer Danner," his father snapped. "Daniels, proceed." Officer Daniels grinned, unclipping his dog's leash. "Rex, forward," he commanded, pointing at Marlene. "Apprehend." The police dog lunged forward, but then something unexpected happened. As the dog approached Marlene, she made a subtle hand gesture, almost imperceptible, and whispered something under her breath. The K9 stopped abruptly, ears perked. It tilted its head, looking at Marlene with new interest. Then, to everyone's shock, the dog dropped to the ground, rolled onto its back, and wagged its tail submissively. "Rex!" Daniels shouted, his face contorted with confusion. "Apprehend! Now!" But the dog ignored him, instead crawling forward on its belly toward Marlene, whining softly. "What the hell?" Sheriff Danner muttered, his hand now fully on his weapon. Marlene knelt slowly, extending her hand to the police dog, which licked her fingers respectfully. Shadow remained calm beside her, as if he'd expected nothing less. "That's impossible," Daniels sputtered. "He's never disobeyed a command, unless he received a stronger one," Rick said quietly, watching Marlene with newfound curiosity. Sheriff Danner's face darkened with anger. "That's enough. Marlene Jefferson, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interfering with police duties." "On what grounds?" Rick challenged, stepping between his father and Marlene. "Step aside, officer," Sheriff Danner ordered. "That's a direct command from your superior." Rick hesitated, his principles warring with years of conditioning to obey his father. Slowly, reluctantly, he moved aside. Sheriff Danner roughly pulled Marlene's hands behind her back, snapping handcuffs around her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." As he continued the Miranda rights, Marlene remained dignified, her eyes meeting Rick's with an unspoken message. Shadow growled but stayed in place, seemingly understanding that resistance would only make things worse. "Take care of Shadow," Marlene said to Rick as his father led her to the cruiser. "There's food in the pantry." Officer Daniels was still, trying to regain control of Rex, who continued to ignore his commands, watching Marlene with what looked remarkably like respect. As the police car drove away with Marlene in the back seat, neighbors began emerging from their homes, some filming with their phones. Among them was Tommy Davis and his mother. "Why are they arresting Ms. Jefferson?" Tommy asked, his earlier fear replaced by confusion. His mother shook her head. "I don't know, honey. She never bothered anyone." "But Dad said she was dangerous," Tommy insisted. "Sometimes," his mother replied softly. "People say things about others that say more about themselves than the person they're talking about. Later that afternoon, Anna rushed into the police station, finding Rick sitting at his desk, looking troubled. "I just heard what happened," she said breathlessly. "Is it true? They arrested Marlene Jefferson because her dog growled at your father?" Rick rubbed his temples. "It's more complicated than that. Dad claims she interfered with police business, influenced the K-9 somehow." "That's ridiculous," Anna exclaimed, then lowered her voice as other officers glanced their way. "Rick, when I was treating Shadow yesterday, I noticed something. Marlene uses hand signals I've never seen before, and Shadow responds to them perfectly." "What? Are you saying?" "I think she was a dog trainer," Anna whispered. "But not just any trainer. Those commands. I've read about similar techniques in veterinary journals. They're used in military K-9 units." Rick's eyes widened. "You think Marlene was military?" "I think she was more than that," Anna replied. "The way she holds herself, the precision in her movements. And Rick, I think she whispered a command to your K-9 officer's dog. A command that overrode his." Before Rick could respond, there was a commotion at the front desk. A man in a crisp suit was arguing with the desk sergeant. "I'm here to post bail for Marlene Jefferson," the man was saying, his voice calm but authoritative. "And I suggest you process it quickly. My client has been unjustly detained." Rick peered around the corner. He didn't recognize the lawyer, and Willow Creek only had two, neither of whom looked like this polished city attorney. "Who hired him?" Rick whispered to himself. Outside, a black sedan with tinted windows waited at the curb. The driver remained. Inside, face obscured. By evening, the video of Marlene's arrest had spread across social media. The footage clearly showed the police dog refusing to attack and instead submitting to her. Comment sections were filled with questions. Who was this elderly woman? Why did the dog refuse to attack? Was this police harassment? As darkness fell over Willow Creek, Marlene Jefferson returned home, escorted by the mysterious lawyer who refused to give his name to the press. Shadow greeted her joyfully at the door, having been fed and cared for by Anna throughout the day. Once inside, Marlene thanked the lawyer. "Tell James I'm grateful." The man nodded. "Colonel Whitaker said to inform you that Operation Blackstorm is back on their radar. He'll be in touch." After the lawyer left, Marlene sat heavily in her favorite chair, Shadow resting his head on her lap. The events of the day had drained her, but she knew this was just the beginning. In the locked room, she opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph, a younger version of herself in desert camouflage, surrounded by military working dogs and soldiers. She traced a finger over the faces. "They thought time would make them forget," she whispered to Shadow. "But some things are written in more than memory." Outside her window, the black sedan remained parked, its occupant keeping watch through the night. The morning after Marlene's arrest, whispers spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. At the local cafe, patrons huddled over phones, rewatching the viral video of the police dog disobeying commands to attack the elderly woman. "Never seen anything like it," muttered Frank Wilson, the hardware store owner. "That dog just laid down like she was its mama." "Whole thing stinks," replied Doris Baker, wiping down the counter. "Marlene's been here 15 years and never caused trouble. Now suddenly she's a criminal?" Anna Miller sat in the corner booth, pretending to focus on her coffee while absorbing every word. She'd spent a restless night researching military K-9 training protocols, unable to shake what she'd witnessed. Rick had messaged her that morning, his texts terse. "Dad's on warpath. Be careful. Meeting you at Marlene's at noon." Anna arrived at Marlene's modest house 20 minutes early. To her surprise, Shadow greeted her at the gate without barking, his intelligent eyes seeming to recognize her from the veterinary clinic. Behind him stood Marlene, looking remarkably composed for someone who'd spent part of the previous day in jail. "Ms. Jefferson," Anna called out, approaching cautiously. "I'm Rick's girlfriend." "Anna Miller," Marlene finished for her. "I remember. Come in, child. I've been expecting you." The interior of Marlene's home was neat and sparsely decorated, with the distinct feel of military precision. Photos hung in perfect alignment on walls painted a soft beige. In the living room, A worn leather sofa faced a brick fireplace where a small fire crackled despite the mild weather. "Tea?" Marlene offered, her movements efficient as she filled a kettle without waiting for an answer. Anna nodded, gathering her courage. "Miss Jefferson, I have questions about yesterday." "I imagine you do." Marlene set 2 mugs on the coffee table. "And I imagine Officer Danner does too." "Rick's trying to make sense of it all," Anna said carefully. "His father is a man who follows orders without questioning them," Marlene interrupted. "A dangerous quality in anyone with power." Anna leaned forward. "The police K9, you controlled it somehow. I've studied animal behavior, but I've never seen anything like that." A ghost of a smile crossed Marlene's weathered face. "What do you know about military working dogs, Ms. Miller?" "Only what I've read. They're trained to detect explosives, apprehend suspects, protect their handlers. They're trained to save lives," Marlene corrected gently. "And the good ones know the difference between a real threat and a manufactured one." The kettle whistled. As Marlene rose to retrieve it, Anna noticed her posture. Ramrod straight, shoulders squared. Not the stance of an ordinary elderly woman, but of someone who'd spent decades standing at attention. "You were military," Anna stated as Marlene returned with the tea. "Major Marlene Jefferson," she confirmed, setting down the kettle. "First black woman to lead a Special Forces K9 unit. Not that you'll find much about that in any public record." Anna's eyes widened. "They redacted your service?" "Parts of it." Marlene sipped her tea. "The parts that might embarrass certain powerful people." The sound of a car door slamming interrupted them. Through the window, Anna saw Rick approaching, his face tense. Shadow went to the door, tail wagging slightly. He'd apparently decided Rick was acceptable. "Sorry I'm late," Rick said as he entered, nodding respectfully to Marlene. "Dad had me filing reports all morning." "Reports about me, I presume," Marlene said calmly. Rick's expression confirmed her suspicion. "They're trying to build a case. For obstruction, maybe even assaulting an officer. It's ridiculous, but your father is determined," Marlene finished. "Sit down, Officer Danner. It's time you both learned why Mitchell Crane really wants my land." For the next hour, Marlene shared her story. Born in Georgia in 1946, she joined the Army in 1967 against her family's wishes. Her natural affinity with animals led her to K9 training, where she excelled despite rampant discrimination. By the early 2000s, she had risen to lead a specialized unit deployed to Afghanistan, Operation Blackstorm. "We trained dogs to detect not just conventional explosives, but chemical and biological agents," Marlene explained. "Work that saved countless lives, military and civilian." "That's why the police dog responded to you," Anna realized. "You used a command it recognized." Marlene nodded. "Military K9s are trained with universal emergency protocols. That dog recognized authority it was conditioned to respect." Rick frowned. "But what does any of this have to do with Mitchell Crane?" Marlene rose and walked to the locked room Anna had noticed earlier. The key around her neck gleamed as she inserted it into the lock. "Because Mitchell Crane isn't just a developer," she said, swinging the door open. 20 years ago, he was Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell Crane, military contractor and head of Project Sentinel, a classified program testing chemical agents on soldiers without their knowledge or consent. The room beyond was like stepping into a military archive. Maps covered one wall, pinned with colored markers. A large corkboard displayed newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes connected by red string. Glass cases held medals, including the Medal of Honor Anna had glimpsed around Marlene's neck in the photograph. "My unit discovered what Crane was doing," Marlene continued, pointing to a photograph of a younger uniformed Mitchell Crane. "We were deployed to rescue a kidnapped general's family, General James Whitaker. During the operation, we found documents linking Crane to illegal testing. Soldiers getting sick, developing cancers, neurological conditions." "You reported him," Rick guessed. "I did my duty," Marlene corrected. "Presented the evidence to my commanding officers." Her voice hardened. "They buried it." Crane had powerful friends in defense contracting. I was quietly forced into retirement. Insubordination was the official reason. But why does he want your land now? Anna asked. Shadow had moved to Marlene's side, as if sensing her distress at the memories. Because I kept copies of everything, Marlene said quietly. And because this land holds more secrets than just mine. Before she could elaborate, Shadow's ears perked up. A car engine rumbled outside. Marlene moved quickly to the window, then relaxed slightly. It seems we have another visitor, she said. One I've been expecting. A tall, distinguished black man in his 60s stepped out of a black sedan, the same car Anna had noticed at the police station the previous day. He moved with military precision as he approached the house. Colonel Whitaker, Marlene explained. The general I mentioned, now a Pentagon liaison, and the man who bailed me out yesterday. Rick tensed. Should I be worried about a high-ranking military officer showing up in Willow Creek? That depends, Marlene replied with a hint of a smile. On which side of history you want to be on, Officer Danner? Colonel James Whitaker entered without knocking, his presence immediately filling the small room. He nodded to Marlene with familiar respect. Major Jefferson, he said, his voice deep and commanding. Situation's escalated. Crane knows I'm here. These are friends, Marlene indicated Rick and Anna. They've earned the truth. Whitaker assessed them briefly, then continued. Crane's not just after your land for a mall, Marlene. Our sources indicate he's working with a private military contractor, Phoenix Solutions. They believe something is buried on your property. The evidence? Rick asked. More than that, Whitaker replied grimly. Chemical weapons components from Project Sentinel, buried here when the program was officially terminated in 2005. Anna gasped. That's why he's so desperate for this specific property. They're not just trying to take your land, Whitaker told Marlene. They want to erase everything you know. Marlene nodded solemnly. I suspected as much when he first approached. The offer was too high for commercial development. We need to go public, Rick insisted. If what you're saying is true, this is criminal activity at the highest level. With what proof? Whitaker challenged. Most records were destroyed years ago. It would be your word against a decorated former officer who's now a respected businessman. Then, we find proof, Anna said firmly. Ms. Jefferson kept records. There must be other evidence, other witnesses. My old unit, Marlene murmured. Those who survived. As they discussed strategy, Shadow suddenly growled, moving to the window. Outside, a van with Willow Creek cable painted on the side had parked across the street. No one had exited the vehicle. They're watching us, Marlene observed calmly. Have been since yesterday. Whitaker checked his watch. I need to return to Washington tonight. Marlene, consider coming with me. You'd be safer. She shook her head firmly. I've run once before, James. Not again. This is my home. As Whitaker prepared to leave, he handed Rick a business card with only a phone number. If things escalate, call this, day or night. After the colonel departed, Rick, Anna, and Marlene formed a plan. Rick would discreetly investigate connections between his father, Crane, and any unusual activities. Anna would research the environmental and health impacts of the chemicals Marlene described. And Marlene would contact former members of her unit, who might be willing to speak out. That evening, as Rick drove back to the station, his mind raced with everything he'd learned. His father, the man he'd respected all his life, was potentially involved in a conspiracy that went far beyond small-town corruption. At the station, he accessed the computer database, searching for connections between Mitchell Crane and his father. What he found disturbed him. Emails dating back 3 years, discussing property acquisition opportunities in predominantly black neighborhoods. The most recent exchange mentioned Marlene specifically. Jefferson property remains priority. Target, owner uncooperative, suggest alternative measures. Timeline critical before Q3 excavation. Rick downloaded the emails to a flash drive, his hands shaking slightly. As he was about to log off, Officer Daniels appeared behind him. Sheriff's looking for you, Daniels said, his eyes narrowing at the screen. What are you working on so late? Just clearing old reports, Rick lied, closing the window. Tell him I'll be right there. As Rick headed to his father's office, he texted Anna. Found something. Crane planning excavation. Meet tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, Anna was at her apartment, combing through scientific journals for information on chemical weapons testing. Her screen displayed a research paper titled, Long-Term Health Effects of Organophosphate Exposure in Military Personnel, 2010. The author list caught her. The third name was M. Jefferson. She documented it all, Anna whispered to herself, downloading the paper. She tried to warn them. Her phone buzzed with Rick's text. Before she could reply, her screen displayed an incoming email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, simply, Black Storm survivors. The body contained a single line. We've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Attached was a file with medical records of dozens of soldiers, all showing similar symptoms, all having served in the same region of Afghanistan during the early 2000s. Anna forwarded the email to Rick with a single comment. We're not alone in this. By morning, the quiet investigation had gained momentum. Rick arrived at Marlene's house with a grim expression, flash drive in hand. Crane's been planning this for years, he explained, showing them the emails. And there's more. The mall project was approved with unusual speed, environmental impact studies waived, zoning restrictions modified. Your father's influence? Marlene asked. Rick nodded reluctantly. His signature is on everything. Anna shared her discoveries. Marlene, your research paper from 2012. It details exactly what happened to your unit, and I received anonymous medical records confirming the pattern of exposure. The survivors reaching out, Marlene said softly. Brave souls. Their planning was interrupted by Shadow's alert bark. Through the window, they saw Mitchell Crane himself approaching the house, flanked by two men in suits. Right on schedule, Marlene commented, surprisingly calm. The direct approach when intimidation fails. Should I call Whitaker? Rick asked, reaching for his phone. Not yet, Marlene replied. Let's hear what Crane has to say first. The doorbell rang. Shadow positioned himself protectively beside Marlene as she opened the door. Ms. Jefferson, Crane greeted with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. I thought it was time we spoke directly, without intermediaries. Mitchell, Marlene replied coldly. Or do you prefer Lieutenant Colonel still? His smile faltered slightly. May we come in? What I have to say is better discussed privately. Whatever you have to say can be said here, Marlene stated firmly. In front of witnesses. Crane's eyes flickered to Rick and Anna, hardening when he recognized the sheriff's son. Officer Danner, interesting company you're keeping. Does your father know you're here? I'm off duty, Rick replied evenly, and concerned about harassment of a citizen in our community. Crane's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. Ms. Jefferson, I'm prepared to double my previous offer for your property, $2 million, more than generous for a house in this condition. Still not for sale, Marlene replied simply. You should reconsider, Crane said, his voice dropping. Small towns can be dangerous for people who don't cooperate. Accidents happen. Is that a threat? Rick stepped forward, hand instinctively moving toward where his service weapon would normally be. Simply an observation, Crane replied smoothly. Ms. Jefferson is elderly, lives alone. Concerns for her safety are natural. I've survived worse than you, Mitchell, Marlene said quietly. Much worse. Something dangerous flashed in Crane's eyes. You always were stubborn, Major, but this isn't Afghanistan. No one's coming to save you here. That's where you're wrong, Anna interjected, holding up her phone. Everything you've just said is being recorded, including what sounds very much like a threat. Crane's composure cracked. You have no idea what you're involving yourselves in. This goes beyond a piece of property. We know exactly what this is about, Marlene replied. Project Sentinel. The chemical testing. The buried evidence. The color drained from Crane's face. For a moment, Naked panic replaced his practiced confidence. "You're delusional," he recovered quickly. "The ramblings of an old woman with dementia. No one will believe you." "Perhaps not," Marlene agreed. "But they might believe the documentation I've kept, or the survivors who are starting to speak out, or the chemical analysis of soil samples my young friend here has been collecting." Anna hadn't been collecting soil samples, but she maintained a poker face at Marlene's bluff. Crane backed toward the door. "You've made a serious mistake today. All of you." His eyes locked with Marlene's. "Some secrets should stay buried, Major, for everyone's safety." After Crane and his men departed, Rick exhaled sharply. "He's rattled. That means he's dangerous." "He always was," Marlene said grimly. "Now we need to move quickly. He'll escalate. After this." "What soil samples were you talking about?" Anna asked. "A bluff," Marlene admitted. "But not a bad idea. If there are chemical weapons components buried on my property, there might be trace evidence in the soil." Rick nodded thoughtfully. "We need to document everything. Build a case that's too solid to ignore or bury. And we need to find a journalist we can trust," Anna added. "Someone who won't back down under pressure." "I might know someone," Rick said. "Layla Morales. We were at the academy together before she left for journalism school. She works for the Atlanta Tribune now, specializes in government corruption stories." As they solidified their plans, Shadow suddenly raised his head, ears perked. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Marlene asked, moving to the window. Outside, several unmarked vans had parked down the street. Men in workmen's clothing were unloading equipment, but their movements were too precise, too coordinated for ordinary laborers. "He's not waiting," Marlene observed. "Those are private security, military contractors. I recognize the formation." "We need to get you out of here," Rick insisted. "No," Marlene said firmly. "If I leave, he wins. There's something else we can do." She turned to Anna. "You mentioned soil samples. If we're going to prove what's buried here, we need evidence." "The root cellar," Rick suggested. "If they buried something on your property years ago, that's where they'd access it." Marlene nodded. "Follow me." The root cellar entrance was concealed behind a garden shed at the far edge of Marlene's property. The heavy wooden doors, weathered by years of exposure, groaned as Rick pulled them open. Stone steps descended into darkness. "I haven't been down here in years," Marlene admitted, switching on a flashlight. "Not since I first discovered what they'd hidden." Shadow led the way, his nose working the air as they descended. The cellar was larger than Anna had expected. A main chamber with rough stone walls and a packed earth floor, with smaller rooms branching off. "This was here when I bought the property," Marlene explained. "Former owner was a farmer who stored preserves and root vegetables down here. But I found something else." She moved to the far wall, tapping different stones in a specific pattern. To Rick and Anna's amazement, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. "Hydraulic mechanism," Marlene explained. "Military grade, not something a farmer would install." The hidden room contained a metal vault built into the earthen wall. Unlike the rustic cellar, this was modern technology. A digital keypad glowed softly in the dim light. "Discovered this 6 months after moving in," Marlene said. "Took me 3 years to crack the code." She entered a long sequence of numbers. The vault hissed as the seal broke, the heavy door swinging open automatically. Inside was a treasure trove of documents, files, photographs, digital storage devices, and a small recording device that looked military issue. Everything was meticulously organized and labeled. "My insurance policy," Marlene explained, removing a thick file labeled Sentinel, Phase 2 deployment. Rick examined a map showing what appeared to be Willow Creek, with Marlene's property marked with a red X. "They buried it here because it was remote," Marlene explained. "Rural area, few questions. Previous owner was a contractor's cousin. Property, sold to me by mistake after his death. By the time they realized who I was, it was too late." Anna picked up the recording device. "What's on this?" "The smoking gun," Marlene replied. "Meeting recorded in 2004. Crane and his military sponsors discussing the cover-up after soldiers began showing symptoms. She pressed play. The audio was grainy but clear enough. Liability concerns are secondary. Primary objective is containment of both materials and information. The test subjects, not test subjects general. Soldiers, American soldiers. Semantics, Crane. The point is, they were exposed according to protocol. The fact that the effects were more severe than anticipated is unfortunate, but within acceptable parameters. And the disposal site? Secured. Remote location? Minimal population. Materials contained in military-grade storage. Site will be monitored through shell company ownership. And if there's leakage, contamination? Acceptable collateral. Area demographics make significant outcry unlikely. The recording continued, detailing plans to silence whistleblowers and manipulate medical records to hide evidence of deliberate exposure. My God, Rick whispered. They knowingly poisoned soldiers and were prepared to poison an entire town. If necessary, Marlene added grimly. A predominantly black town that they deemed expendable. Anna was already copying files to her phone. We need to get this to Layla immediately. This is massive. Chemical weapons testing, cover-up, conspiracy at the highest levels. Not just Layla, Rick said. Colonel Whitaker needs to see this too, and we need to secure the original evidence. As they worked, Shadow suddenly tensed, growling toward the cellar entrance. Someone's coming, Marlene whispered, quickly shutting the vault. Back out, quietly. They slipped out of the hidden room, Marlene carefully sealing the entrance. They'd barely concealed themselves behind stacked storage crates when footsteps sounded on the cellar stairs. Two men in work clothes descended, carrying equipment that looked more like military gear than construction tools. Perimeters secured, one said into a radio. Beginning preliminary assessment. Roger that, came the reply, a voice they recognized as Mitchell Crane's. Find the access point. We move everything tonight. The men began methodically examining the walls, using what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar. They're looking for the vault, Anna whispered. Rick assessed their options. The only exit was past the men. He made a quick decision, pulling out. His phone and dialing, suddenly his ringtone blared loudly. The men spun around, reaching for weapons concealed under their jackets. Police! Rick shouted, stepping forward with his badge. What are you doing on private property? The men hesitated, clearly not expecting law enforcement. Utility inspection, one attempted. Gas line assessment. Without notice to the homeowner? Without proper city vehicles? Rick challenged. Identification, both of you. Now. Anna and Marlene emerged from hiding, Shadow staying protectively close to Marlene. Officer Danner, one man said, recognizing him. Your father cleared this operation. My father doesn't authorize trespassing, Rick replied firmly. Call him if you want, but you're leaving now. The men exchanged glances, then reluctantly headed for the stairs. This isn't over, one muttered as they departed. Once alone, Rick turned to Marlene and Anna. We need to move fast. They'll be back with reinforcements and probably a warrant. I'll send everything to Layla now, Anna said, fingers flying over her phone. But we should keep the originals safe somewhere else. I know someone who can help, Marlene said. Louise Ramirez, Sergeant Lou. She served in my unit, lost her leg saving my life during a mission gone wrong. She lives off the grid about 30 miles from here. Crane doesn't know about her. Can we trust her? Rick asked. With my life, Marlene replied without hesitation. She's been hiding from them as long as I have. They carefully packed the most. Critical evidence, the recording, key documents proving the chemical testing and maps of the burial site. As they emerged from the cellar, they saw the workers conferring with new arrivals, men in suits who had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Not real feds, Marlene whispered. Phoenix Solutions, private military contractors. Cranes, people. We need to split up, Rick decided. They'll be watching all of us now. I'll take Shadow and the evidence to Lou, Marlene said. They'll expect me to run, but not where I'm actually going. I'll create a distraction, Rick offered. Make it look like we're leaving with the evidence. Draw them away from you. And I'll get everything to Layla, Anna added. Digital copies, our testimonies, everything we've learned. As they quickly finalized their plan, Marlene paused, placing a hand on Rick's arm. Your father will have to answer for his part in this, Rick finished grimly. No matter what that means for me. Marlene nodded, a newfound respect in her eyes. Your badge says, protect and serve. Today, you honor that oath. They separated at the back of the property. Rick and Anna headed visibly toward his car, carrying decoy folders, while Marlene and Shadow slipped away through a neighbor's yard toward a pre-arranged meeting point where Lou would pick them up. Expected, the men followed Rick and Anna, allowing Marlene to escape unnoticed. As Rick drove away, he watched in the rearview mirror as two black SUVs pulled out to follow them. Phase 1 worked, he told Anna. Now for the hard part, staying alive long enough to make this public. Anna clutched her phone, containing copies of everything they'd found. I've already uploaded everything to a secure cloud server. Even if they get my phone, the evidence is safe. As they drove toward Atlanta, where Layla was based, Rick's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad. He hesitated, then answered on speaker. What the hell do you think you're doing? Sheriff Danner demanded without preamble. Interfering with a federal operation, threatening contractors. They're not federal, Dad, Rick interrupted. They're private military contractors working for Crane, and they're trespassing on private property without a warrant. You don't understand what's at stake here, Rick. His father's voice lowered. This is bigger than some old woman's property. Rights. I know exactly what's at stake, Rick replied coldly. Chemical weapons, illegal testing on soldiers, cover-ups that go all the way to the Pentagon, and you're helping them. A long silence followed. When Sheriff Danner spoke again, his voice had changed. Where are you, Rick? We need to talk, in person. This isn't what you think. It's exactly what I think, Rick replied. And it ends today. He ended the call, exchanging a grim look with Anna. He'll track your phone, she warned. I'm counting on it, Rick replied, turning onto a side road. We need them following us, not looking for Marlene. Meanwhile, Marlene and Shadow had reached the rendezvous point, an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. A battered pickup truck was waiting, its driver a woman in her 50s with a weathered face and alert eyes. Major, Lou Ramirez greeted, sliding over to make room. Just like old times. Too much like old times, Lou, Marlene replied, helping Shadow into the truck. They found the vault. Lou's expression darkened. Bastards never quit, do they? She patted the prosthetic leg visible beneath her jeans. Lesson I learned the hard way. As they drove away, Marlene looked back at the town that had been her home for 15 years. Crane won't stop, she said quietly. Not until he recovers what's buried or destroys us all trying. Then we make sure the whole world knows what. He did, Lou replied, determination in her voice. No more shadows. No more silence. Shadow rested his head on Marlene's lap as the truck sped down the highway, carrying secrets that had been buried far too long. The early morning sun cast long shadows as Colonel James Whitaker strode purposefully through the federal courthouse in Atlanta. After receiving Anna's frantic call the previous evening, he had flown in overnight, pulling every string in his considerable network. Now, flanked by two serious-looking aides, he approached Judge Eleanor Barnes's chambers. Colonel Whitaker, the judge greeted him, her silver hair framing a face that had seen decades of legal battles. It's been a while, not since that terrorism case in '09. Judge Barnes, Whitaker nodded respectfully. I need an emergency injunction. Today. Now. 30 minutes later, Whitaker emerged with a signed federal order temporarily halting any demolition, excavation, or forced removal on Marlene Jefferson's property. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number that he recognized as Sergeant Lou Ramirez's burner phone. Package secure. Eagle resting. Awaiting coordinates. Marlene and the evidence were safe. For now. Meanwhile, Anna Miller had barely slept. Holed up in a modest hotel room on the outskirts of Atlanta, she had spent the night organizing the digital evidence and preparing it for Layla Morales, Shadow's veterinary records provided an unexpected bonus. Footage from the clinic's security cameras showed men searching the treatment rooms days before the confrontation at Marlene's house. They were planning this all along, Anna murmured to herself as she added the clips to her file. Her phone rang, Rick calling from a new number. "Are you safe?" she asked immediately. "For now," Rick replied, his voice tight with exhaustion. "They followed me halfway to Birmingham before I lost them." "You?" Whitaker came through. "He's got an injunction against Crane. I'm meeting Layla in, an hour. Be careful," Rick warned. "Crane's people are everywhere. I've been monitoring police channels. Dad's put out an APB on my car." Anna's breath caught. "Rick, what are you going to do?" A long pause. "What I should have done years ago. Stand up to him." Across town, Layla Morales waited in a busy coffee shop, her laptop open but her eyes constantly scanning the entrance. At 32, she had built a reputation as a fearless investigative journalist with the Atlanta Tribune, specializing in government corruption. When Rick's message had come through, she'd recognized its importance immediately. Anna entered cautiously, carrying a backpack and wearing sunglasses despite the overcast day. The women recognized each other from Rick's descriptions and exchanged nods before moving to a corner table. "Rick vouches for you," Anna said without preamble. "Says you can't be bought." Layla's mouth quirked. "He should know. We both turned down lucrative offers to look the other way on a police brutality case 3 years ago. That's why he's a small-town cop and I'm still driving a 10-year-old Honda." She leaned forward. "Show me what you've got." For the next hour, Anna laid out everything. Marlene's military background, the chemical testing, the buried evidence, Crane's private security force, the sheriff's complicity. Layla took rapid notes, occasionally asking sharp questions that revealed her quick grasp of the situation. "This is Pulitzer material," she said finally, scrolling through the documents Anna had transferred to her laptop. "But also dangerous as hell. These people don't play games." "Neither do we," Anna replied firmly. "Marlene spent 15 years guarding this secret. Rick sacrificed his relationship with his father. I've probably lost my veterinary career. We're all in." Layla nodded, respect in her eyes. "I'll need 24 hours to verify independently and get editorial approval. This isn't just a local story. It's national, maybe international." "We don't have 24 hours, Anna warned. "Crane's getting desperate. The injunction won't stop him for long." "Then we work faster," Layla decided, closing her laptop. "I've got contacts at the CDC who can verify the chemical exposure data, and a friend at the Pentagon who owes me for keeping his name out of a scandal last year." As they finalized their plan, Anna's phone buzzed with an alert from her veterinary clinic's security system. The footage showed Sheriff Danner and 2 men in suits searching her office. They were looking for her, and for evidence. "It's starting," Anna said grimly, showing Layla the feed. "We need to move." Back in Willow Creek, public sentiment was shifting rapidly. The video of Marlene's arrest had gained national attention, with commentators questioning the use of force against an elderly woman. Veterans groups had begun speaking out after recognizing Marlene's name from declassified mission reports. Outside the sheriff's office, a small but growing crowd of protesters had gathered, many holding signs reading, "Justice for Major Jefferson." "And who commands your K9? Sheriff Thomas Danner watched from his window, his face tight with stress. The phone on his desk rang. Mitchell Crane again. "I can't hold this together much longer," Danner said without greeting. "The injunctions bought us some time, but people are asking questions I can't answer." "Then don't answer them," Crane snapped. "Stick to the script. Jefferson is mentally unstable, making false accusations. Your son is confused, manipulated by her." "My son has evidence, Mitchell. Real evidence." A long pause. "What kind of evidence?" "I don't know exactly, but he said something about chemical weapons, illegal testing. Said it goes all the way to the Pentagon." Crane's voice turned cold. "Handle your son, Thomas, whatever it takes. We're too close to let this fall apart now." After hanging up, Sheriff Danner stared at the photo on his desk, himself and Rick at his son's police academy graduation. With a heavy sigh, he opened his drawer and removed a small recorder, pressing the button to create a new audio file. My name is Sheriff Thomas Danner, he began, his voice weary. And this is my confession. At Lou Ramirez's cabin, hidden deep, in the Georgia woods, Marlene sat on the porch with Shadow at her feet. Despite the peaceful setting, her military instincts remained on high alert. She watched as Lou emerged from the tree line, completing another perimeter check. All clear, Lou reported, easing into a chair beside Marlene. The former sergeant moved, with surprising grace despite her prosthetic leg, years of adaptation evident in her fluid movements. No one followed us. They'll find us eventually, Marlene said quietly. Crane won't stop. Lou nodded, her weathered face solemn. I've contacted the others, Jackson, Rivera, Thompson, all the survivors from our unit who can still travel. They're coming. You shouldn't have risked it, Marlene protested. Wasn't my call, Lou replied with a half smile. Once they heard you were finally fighting back, wild horses couldn't stop them. We've been waiting 15 years for this, Major. Shadow's ears suddenly perked up, his body tensing. Both women immediately reached for weapons. Lou a shotgun leaning against the wall, Marlene a handgun concealed under her jacket. A vehicle approached slowly through the trees, Colonel Whitaker's black sedan. Stand down, Marlene told Shadow, who relaxed marginally but remained vigilant. Whitaker emerged from the car looking grimmer than when they'd last seen him. It's worse than we thought, he announced without preamble. Crane's called in every favor he has. They're trying to get the injunction lifted on national security grounds. Can they do that? Lou demanded. They're claiming the material buried on your property is classified military hardware that poses an imminent threat if disturbed improperly. Whitaker handed Marlene a document. They've got a federal judge in Washington reviewing it now. Marlene scanned the paper, her expression darkening. They're using our own evidence against us. The chemical weapons buried there become the reason they need to seize the property. There's more, Whitaker continued. I accessed Crane's private server through a contact at the Pentagon. Found this. He passed Marlene a tablet displaying what appeared to be technical schematics. That's not just chemical weapon components, Lou said, looking over Marlene's shoulder. That's a delivery system. They weren't just storing the materials. They were building something, Marlene finished. Something they never wanted found. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Layla Morales was moving with the efficiency of a seasoned journalist on the brink of a career-defining story. With Anna's help, she had verified key elements of Marlene's account through independent sources. CDC contacts confirmed that unusual clusters of rare cancers and neurological disorders had been documented among veterans of certain classified operations. A Pentagon whistleblower corroborated the existence of Project Sentinel, though official records remained sealed. Now, sitting in her editor's office, Layla made her case. This isn't just another corruption story, Jim. This is systematic abuse of power, endangering civilians, betrayal of our troops. Jim Sanders, the Tribune's executive editor, held up a hand. I believe you, Layla. The evidence is compelling. But Crane has already called our publisher directly, threatened lawsuits that would bankrupt the paper. Let him try, Layla challenged. Truth is an absolute defense against libel. It's not just lawsuits. There have been other threats. Sanders looked uncomfortable. His people suggested that running this story could be seen as compromising national security. Layla leaned forward. That's how you know we're onto something big, Jim. They're scared. After a tense silence, Sanders nodded. Green light. But we do this by the book. Every fact triple-checked, every source verified, and we go digital first. Too risky to wait for print. Layla's phone buzzed. A text from Anna. They found my apartment. Trashed it, moving to backup location. The noose was tightening. As evening fell, Rick Danner sat in his parked car outside the Willow Creek police station, gathering his courage. He had driven straight through from Birmingham, avoiding main roads, and switching vehicles twice with help from old academy friends. Now, watching officers come and go from the building where he'd worked his entire career, he felt a strange calm settle over him. His phone rang. Anna. Layla got approval, she told him. Story goes live at midnight. Are you sure about this next part? No choice, Rick replied. Dad has to answer for his role, and I need to get those falsified reports before they disappear. Be careful, Anna pleaded. Whitaker says Crane's people are getting desperate. That makes two of us, Rick said softly. I love you, Anna. Before she could respond, he ended the call and stepped out of the car. Taking a deep breath, he walked straight through the front door of the station. The desk sergeant's eyes widened. Rick, your dad's been looking everywhere for you. I know, Rick replied calmly. That's why I'm here. Sheriff Danner was on the phone when Rick entered his office without knocking. Seeing his son, the sheriff froze, then quickly ended his call. Where the hell have you been? He demanded, rising from his chair. I've had APBs out for 2 days. I know that too, Rick said, closing the door behind him. Just like I know about your arrangement with Mitchell Crane, the falsified complaints against Marlene Jefferson, the buried chemical weapons. Sheriff Danner's face paled. You don't understand what you're talking about. I understand perfectly, Rick countered. I've seen the evidence, all of it. The recording of Crane discussing using soldiers as test subjects, the emails between you two planning to seize Marlene's property, the environmental impact reports you helped suppress. It's complicated, Rick. No, it's actually very simple, Rick interrupted. You betrayed your oath. You helped cover up crimes against American soldiers, against your own community. The sheriff sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older. I didn't know what was buried there. Not at first. Crane just said it was a development opportunity. By the time you realized, you were already involved, Rick finished. So you doubled down. To Rick's surprise, his father nodded. I've made a full confession, he said, sliding a flash drive across the desk. Everything I know about Crane, the development, all of it. I recorded it this morning. Rick stared at the drive, then at his father. Why? Because you were right, Sheriff Danner said simply. And because whatever else I am, I'm still your father. I won't let Crane make you collateral damage in this. Before Rick could respond, the station's lights suddenly went out. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, bathing the room in dim red light. That's not a power failure, Sheriff Danner said, reaching for his weapon. That's... The window behind him shattered as the night erupted in chaos. The attack came with military precision. Simultaneous power cuts throughout Willow Creek, communications jammed, and strategic points secured within minutes. At Marlene's property, black-clad figures with advanced tactical gear swarmed the perimeter, bypassing the police tape marking the federal injunction zone. Breaching team in position, a voice reported through encrypted channels. No sign of the target or the evidence. Mitchell Crane, monitoring from a command vehicle parked 2 blocks away, slammed his fist on the console. She has to have hidden it somewhere on the property. Find it. As his men ransacked Marlene's home, Crane's phone rang, a secure line from Washington. Please tell me you've contained the situation, said a terse voice that carried the unmistakable tone of Pentagon authority. Working on it, Crane replied. Minor complications. Minor doesn't describe what I'm hearing, the voice snapped. An Atlanta newspaper is about to run a story connecting Project Sentinel to unauthorized chemical weapons testing. Veterans are speaking out, and Colonel Whitaker, a decorated war hero, is publicly supporting their claims. I'll handle Whitaker, Crane promised. And the evidence won't see daylight. You have my word. Your word lost its value when you lost control of this operation, the voice replied coldly. Clean it up, Crane, or we'll send someone who can. The line went dead, leaving Crane seething. 15 years of careful planning unraveling because of one stubborn old woman and her dog. Unbeknownst to Crane, Lou Ramirez had installed hidden cameras throughout Marlene's property years earlier, a precaution that now gave them eyes on the operation. In Lou's cabin, Marlene Whitaker and 3 newly arrived veterans from their old unit watched the feeds on multiple screens. Standard search pattern, observed Carlos Rivera, a former staff sergeant now walking with a cane due to neurological damage from chemical exposure. They're looking for the vault. Let them look, Marlene said calmly. The real evidence is already out. Not all of it, Thomas Jackson added. At 55, the former medic still carried himself with military bearing despite the tremor in his hands, another legacy of Project Sentinel. The delivery system specs Whitaker found change everything. They weren't just testing chemicals, they were weaponizing them for deployment in civilian areas. Whitaker's phone buzzed with an alert. It's happening. Sheriff's Station is under attack. Rick Danner was inside when they hit. Marlene's face hardened. We need to move. Now. Major, with all due respect, that's exactly what Crane wants, Lou cautioned. Draw you out, take you down, discredit everything as the ravings of a disgruntled veteran. I'm not abandoning those kids, Marlene stated firmly. They risked everything to help me. Shadow and I are going back. The German shepherd, hearing his name, moved to her side, eyes alert and ready. Not alone, you're not, Jackson said, checking his weapon. I didn't survive 3 tours and Crane's poisoned just to hide in the woods while he wins. One by one. The other veterans nodded their agreement. Lou was the last, a slow smile spreading across her weathered face. Well, Major, looks like you've got yourself a squad again. At the police station, chaos reigned. The attackers, professionally equipped men in tactical gear with no identifying insignia, had breached the building from multiple points. Sheriff Danner had reacted quickly, pushing Rick behind the heavy oak desk as bullets shattered the office windows. Private military contractors, the sheriff shouted over the gunfire, returning fire with his service weapon. Phoenix Solutions, Cranes, Personal Army. Rick had his own weapon drawn, years of training kicking in despite the surreal situation of being under fire in his own station. We need to reach the evidence room. All the original complaints against Marlene are there. A brief lull in the shooting gave them their opening. Father and son moved in practiced coordination, clearing corners as they made their way down the hallway toward the records section. Behind them, they could hear their fellow officers engaged in firefights throughout the building. Why are they doing this? Rick demanded as they took cover behind a filing cabinet. The story's about to break anyway, because the truth is worse than what you found, his father replied grimly. I heard Crane on the phone earlier. Whatever's buried on Jefferson's land isn't just chemical weapon components. It's something they're terrified of having exposed. As they reached the evidence room, Sheriff Danner punched in his access code. The door swung open to reveal Officer Daniels, the canine handler from the confrontation at Marlene's, already inside, hastily stuffing files into a bag. Daniels! Sheriff Danner barked. What the hell are you doing? Daniels spun around, weapon raised. Following orders, sir. The real ones. Put it down, Rick ordered, his own gun aimed steadily. You're stealing evidence in an active investigation. No, Daniels sneered. I'm protecting national security, like I've been doing for years while working for Crane. The revelation hit Rick like a physical blow. You've been Crane's inside man? All this time? Someone had to keep an eye on things, Daniels replied. Make sure the old lady didn't cause trouble. Your dad was useful but too squeamish when it really counted. Sheriff Danner's face flushed with anger. Drop the weapon, Daniels, that's an order. You don't give the orders anymore, Tom, Daniels said coldly, his finger tightening on the trigger. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sheriff Danner lunged forward, shoving Rick aside as Daniels fired. The bullet caught the sheriff in the shoulder, spinning him around. Rick returned fire, his shot catching Daniels in the leg. The corrupt officer went down howling in pain. Dad! Rick knelt beside his father, applying pressure to the wound. I'm fine, Sheriff Danner grunted, though his face had gone pale. Get the files. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the gunfire. Through the window, Rick could see multiple SUVs converging on the station. More of Crane's forces arriving as reinforcements. We're out of time, he muttered, quickly gathering the critical files while keeping his weapon trained on the wounded Daniels. His phone buzzed with a text from Anna. Story just went live. Layla published early when she heard about the attacks. It's all out there now. A small victory, but they were still trapped. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. Police sirens coming from multiple directions. And not just any sirens. State troopers, Sheriff Danner said, a hint of hope in his voice. And those deeper tones. FBI. Whitaker had come through again, Rick realized. The colonel had enough clout to bring in federal reinforcements, but Crane's men weren't retreating. If anything, the gunfire intensified as they made a desperate push to complete their mission before the authorities arrived in force. "We need to hold this position," Rick told his father, helping him into a more defensible corner of the room. "Help is coming." A new voice came over the police radio. Marlene Jefferson. "This is Major Marlene Jefferson to all law enforcement frequencies. Crane's forces are attempting to secure evidence of chemical weapons testing and development. Be advised, these men are armed and operating under private contract, not government authority. I repeat, they are not legitimate federal agents." Rick grabbed the radio. "Major Jefferson, this is Officer Danner. We're pinned down in the station evidence room." Daniels was working for Crane. He tried to destroy the original complaint files. "Hold your position, officer," Marlene replied calmly. "We're approaching from the east side." "We?" Rick questioned, but the radio had gone silent. His answer came minutes later as a new sound joined the cacophony, the distinctive bark of a German shepherd, followed by multiple covering fire patterns that could only come from trained military personnel. Through the window, Rick caught glimpses of Marlene moving with shadow toward the station, flanked by several middle-aged men and one woman who, despite various disabilities, moved with unmistakable tactical precision. Marlene's old unit had come to fight one last battle. Inside the command vehicle, Mitchell Crane watched his operation unravel on multiple screens. State police were setting up roadblocks, FBI tactical teams were deploying, and most damning of all, his phone was exploding, with notifications as Layla Morales' story spread across news outlets nationally. "Sir, we need to abort," his security chief urged. "Phoenix Solutions can't be caught in a firefight with federal agents. The legal exposure—" "Shut up," Crane snapped, his carefully cultivated composure finally cracking. 15 years of work, millions in development, all destroyed by that woman and her dog. His phone rang again, Washington calling. Crane didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a tactical vest and a weapon from the equipment rack. "What are you doing, sir?" the security chief asked, alarmed. "Finishing this myself," Crane replied, his voice cold with determination. "If Jefferson has copies of the delivery system plans, everything we've built is compromised. I need to make sure she doesn't talk." "Sir, that's suicide. The feds are—" "I'm not going to prison," Crane cut him off. "And I'm not letting that self-righteous major destroy everything we've worked for." Before his men could stop him, Crane was out the door, moving purposefully toward the chaos at the police station. Inside, Rick and his father had managed to hold their position, but the situation was deteriorating. Sheriff Danner's wound was bleeding heavily, and Crane's men were making a coordinated push toward the evidence room. "You need to go," Sheriff Danner told his son, voice weakening. "Take the files and get out the back way." "I'm not leaving you," Rick insisted. "This is my mess," his father replied. "My chance to make it right." Before Rick could argue further, the door burst open. He raised his weapon, then lowered it in shock as Shadow bounded in, followed by Marlene Jefferson and a limping Lou Ramirez. "Cavalry's here," Lou announced with grim humor. "Though we're a bit more arthritis than artillery these days." Marlene knelt beside Sheriff Danner, quickly assessing his wound. "You'll live," she told him bluntly, "if we get you out of here." "Major Jefferson," the sheriff said weakly. "I'm sorry. For everything." Marlene's expression softened slightly. "Save it for the witness stand, Sheriff. We've got work to do." Outside, the firefight was intensifying as state police and FBI forces engaged Crane's mercenaries. The veterans from Marlene's unit had split up, using their military training to coordinate with law enforcement and cut off escape routes. "We need to move now," Lou urged. "Building's not secure." As they prepared to evacuate, Sheriff Danner grabbed Rick's arm. "Son, whatever happens, I'm proud of you. Standing up, doing what's right." Rick nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Let's get you out of here, Dad." They made it halfway down the back corridor when Mitchell Crane stepped out from a side room, weapon raised. "Major Jefferson," he said, his polished veneer stripped away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "Still causing problems after all these years," Shadow growled, positioning himself protectively in front of Marlene. It's over, Crane, Marlene replied calmly. The story's out. The FBI's here. Your private army is being rounded up as we speak. Nothing's over until I say it is, Crane snarled, his aim unwavering. You have no idea what you've done, what you've exposed. This went beyond weapons testing. We were developing systems to protect American cities from chemical attacks. By poisoning American soldiers? Lou challenged. By burying experimental weapons in civilian communities? Acceptable losses, Crane replied coldly. For the greater good. There's nothing good about what you did, Marlene said. And I think deep down, you know that. For a moment, something like doubt flickered across Crane's face. Then his expression hardened. Enough talk. You're coming with me, Major. You're going to tell the world this was all a misunderstanding. A confused old woman with dementia making wild accusations. And if I refuse? Marlene asked. Crane's smile was chilling. Then, this ends the way it should have 15 years ago. With you silenced permanently, he shifted his aim toward Shadow. Starting with your dog. What happened next occurred so quickly that Rick could barely process it. As Crane's finger tightened on the trigger, Sheriff Danner lunged forward despite his wound, knocking the weapon upward. The shot went wild, hitting the ceiling. Shadow, responding to a hand signal from Marlene, launched forward in a perfectly executed takedown, clamping onto Crane's arm with trained precision. The developer went down hard, screaming as the German Shepherd held him immobilized. Stand down, Shadow, Marlene commanded after a moment. The dog immediately released Crane and returned to her side, watching the fallen man with vigilant eyes. Sheriff, Danner collapsed against the wall, his strength finally giving out. Rick rushed to his father's side while Lou covered Crane with her weapon. Always knew. That dog was special. Sheriff Danner managed before losing consciousness. FBI agents poured in moments later, securing Crane and calling for medical assistance. As paramedics worked on Sheriff Danner, Marlene knelt beside Shadow, gently stroking his fur. Good boy, she whispered. The best boy. Outside, dawn was breaking over Willow Creek. The long night was over, but the real battle, for justice, for truth, for accountability, was just beginning. 3 months after the night that changed Willow Creek forever, the Atlanta Federal Courthouse buzzed with tension. Camera crews lined the steps outside, while inside the largest courtroom was filled to capacity. The trial of Mitchell Crane had become a national spectacle, drawing attention from veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and government, watchdogs alike. Marlene Jefferson sat in the front row, her posture military straight despite her 78 years. Shadow rested at her feet, a special exemption granted by the judge after learning of his service history. Beside them sat Anna Miller, her hand intertwined with Rick Danner's. Across the aisle, Lou Ramirez and the surviving members of Operation Blackstorm filled an entire row, their presence a silent testament to years of suffering and silence. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Eleanor Barnes entered, her silver hair gleaming under the courtroom lights. The prosecution table was led by a no-nonsense federal attorney named Sarah Reynolds, hand-selected by the Justice Department, after the scope of Crane's crimes became apparent. Opposing her sat Crane's defense team, 5 high-priced lawyers from a prestigious Washington firm, their expressions confident despite the mountain of evidence against their client. Mitchell, Crane himself looked diminished in his tailored suit, the arrogance drained from his face after months in federal custody. His eyes darted occasionally toward Marlene, a mixture of hatred and fear evident in his gaze. The prosecution calls Major Marlene Jefferson, Attorney Reynolds announced. A hushed anticipation fell over the courtroom as Marlene rose, giving Shadow a gentle command to stay. She walked to the witness stand with dignity, swearing her oath with the clear voice of someone accustomed to speaking truth to power. Major Jefferson, Reynolds began, please tell the court about your military service and your involvement with Operation Blackstorm. For the next hour, Marlene detailed her distinguished career. From her groundbreaking role as the first black woman to lead a Special Forces K-9 unit through her deployments in combat zones around the world. She explained how Operation Blackstorm had been created to rescue hostages and detect chemical and biological threats using specially trained dogs. And when did you first become aware of Project Sentinel? Reynolds asked. Marlene's expression grew somber. During a rescue operation in Afghanistan, 2004. We were extracting General James Whitaker's family from captivity when we discovered documents in a hidden compartment. They detailed unauthorized chemical testing on American soldiers, specifically my unit and others operating in the region. And the defendant's role in this testing? Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell Crane was the program director, Marlene stated firmly. His signature was on every authorization form, every test protocol. When soldiers began showing symptoms, neurological issues, respiratory problems, unusual cancers, he ordered the records classified and the soldiers reassigned to different units to hide the pattern. Crane's lead attorney objected repeatedly, citing national security concerns. But Judge Barnes allowed the testimony to continue, a testament to the thorough declassification work Colonel Whitaker had orchestrated behind the scenes. As Marlene continued her testimony, she maintained her composure even when describing the most horrific details: fellow soldiers collapsing during training exercises, unexplained seizures, medical concerns dismissed as stress reactions. The courtroom was silent except for her steady voice and the occasional sob from family members of affected veterans. "What happened when you reported these findings to your superiors?" Reynolds asked. "I was told the matter would be investigated internally," Marlene replied. 2 weeks later, I was called to a meeting where Mitchell Crane himself was present. He informed me that I was being honorably discharged for health concerns. When I protested, it was changed to insubordination. "Did you continue to pursue the matter after your discharge?" "I tried," Marlene said. "But files disappeared. Witnesses were transferred or retired. Then I learned that chemical components from Project Sentinel were being stored somewhere civilian. I tracked them to Willow Creek, to what would eventually become my property." "You purchased the land knowingly?" "I did," Marlene confirmed. "To protect people. To guard the evidence until the day came when someone would listen." When the defense's turn for cross-examination came, Crane's attorney approached, with calculated skepticism. "Major Jefferson, isn't it true that you harbored resentment toward the military after your discharge? That this alleged conspiracy could simply be an elaborate attempt at revenge?" Marlene's gaze was steady. "I never resented the military, counselor. I resented those who betrayed its values. There's a difference. Yet you kept these so-called discoveries secret for 15 years. Why not come forward sooner if lives were at stake?" "I did come forward, repeatedly. To military authorities, to the VA, even to a congressman. Each time the evidence disappeared, witnesses recanted under pressure, and I was labeled unstable." Marlene leaned forward slightly. "When you control the narrative, counselor, you can make the truth sound like madness." The cross-examination continued for hours, but Marlene remained unshaken. When she finally stepped down, returning to her seat beside Shadow, the courtroom erupted in respectful applause that the judge made no attempt to silence. The trial continued for weeks. Rick testified about the falsified complaints against Marlene and his discovery of the correspondence between his father and Crane. Anna presented her findings about the health impacts of the chemicals used in Project Sentinel. Layla Morales took the stand to detail how she had verified Marlene's claims through independent sources. Most damaging of all was Sheriff Thomas Danner's testimony. Still recovering from his gunshot wound, he appeared in court wearing a sling, his once commanding presence humbled by his role in the events. "I knew what I was doing was wrong," he admitted under oath. "But I told myself it was for the good of the town. Jobs, development, progress. I didn't know about the chemical weapons until much later, and by then, I was already compromised." "When did you decide to record your confession?" the prosecutor asked. Sheriff Danner's eyes found his son in the audience. "When Rick stood up. To me. When I realized he was the better man, the better officer. I couldn't keep living the lie." "And what did Mitchell Crane tell you about Marlene Jefferson?" "That she was dangerous, mentally unstable, a threat to national security." The sheriff shook his head. "But I'd seen her with that dog, seen how they responded to each other. That wasn't insanity. That was training. Discipline. honor. When asked why he finally risked his life to stop Crane during the confrontation at the police station, Sheriff Danner's answer was simple. Because it was the right thing to do. Something I should have remembered a long time ago. As the trial neared its conclusion, an unexpected moment captivated the nation. The judge granted a special request for Shadow to be brought to the center of the courtroom. A K9 handling expert demonstrated how the dog responded to Marlene's commands, the same commands that had caused the police dog to stand down months earlier. These are universal emergency override protocols, the expert explained, developed for military K9s to prevent friendly fire incidents. The fact that a police dog responded to them confirms that it was trained using military guidelines and recognized Major Jefferson's authority. The demonstration left no doubt about Marlene's expertise or the legitimacy of her claims. Shadow performed flawlessly, his disciplined response a stark contrast to the chaos of that first confrontation. In his closing argument, Crane's attorney attempted one final defense. Whatever my client's actions, they were undertaken with national security in mind. He believed he was protecting Americans from chemical threats. His methods may have been flawed, but his intentions were patriotic. Prosecutor Reynolds's rebuttal was devastating. Patriotism isn't poisoning the soldiers who volunteered to serve. It isn't burying chemical weapons in a civilian community, and it certainly isn't silencing those brave enough to stand against such abuses. She gestured toward Marlene. If you want to see patriotism, look at Major Jefferson, who protected her country even when her country failed to protect her. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. As Crane was led away, his face ashen, he locked eyes briefly with Marlene. No words were exchanged, but the look conveyed everything. He had lost, she had won, and 15 years of silence had finally ended. Outside the courthouse, Marlene faced a forest of microphones with the same composure she had shown throughout the trial. Reporters shouted questions about retribution, about vindication, about her feelings toward Crane. Instead of answering directly, she read from a handwritten statement. This fight wasn't just mine. I was one of many who were forgotten. Today isn't about victory. It's about truth, about remembering that some oaths cannot be broken, no matter how inconvenient they become. As the cameras flashed, Shadow stood faithfully by her side, the living embodiment of the loyalty Marlene had demonstrated throughout her long struggle for justice. That evening, as the verdict dominated news headlines across the country, Anna found Rick sitting alone on the steps of their hotel. His father had been granted leniency in exchange for his testimony and cooperation, but still faced significant charges. He called from the hospital, Rick said as Anna sat beside him. Wanted me to know he's pleading guilty to all charges. No. Deals. Is that what you wanted? Anna asked gently. Rick shook his head. I don't know what I want anymore. He did terrible things, but in the end, he chose you. Anna finished. Chose to do the right thing. Does that make up for the rest? Rick wondered. Anna had no answer, but she took his hand, offering silent support as they watched the sun set over Atlanta. Meanwhile, Marlene sat with Colonel Whitaker in a quiet restaurant away from the media frenzy, Shadow resting under the table. The court has ordered full declassification of the Blackstorm and Sentinel files, Whitaker informed her, and the land will remain with you, though the cleanup operation for the buried materials will take months. And the others? Marlene asked. My unit? Full veterans benefits restored, medical care for all service-connected conditions, and a formal apology from the Secretary of Defense. Whitaker smiled slightly. It's not enough, but it's a start. Marlene nodded, gazing out the window at the city lights. 15 years, James. Sometimes I thought this day would never come. You never gave up, he replied simply. That's what makes you who you are. As they spoke, Lou Ramirez and the other veterans from their unit entered, joining them at the large corner table. No words were needed. The bonds forged in combat and strengthened through years of shared struggle spoke volumes. They were finally visible again, no longer shadows of a classified past. 1 year later, Willow Creek had transformed. Where Marlene's modest house once stood, a memorial park now spread across several acres, dedicated to the veterans of Operation Blackstorm and other whistleblowers who had risked everything to expose injustice. The chemical weapons had been safely removed by an elite military environmental team, the soil remediated, and the land repurposed as a place of healing rather than secrets. A simple granite monument at the center bore the names of those who had served in Marlene's unit, both those who had survived to see justice and those who had not. Marlene herself had moved to a comfortable new home at the edge of the park, where she could look out at the monument from her porch. At 79, she remained active in veterans advocacy, though she preferred to work behind the scenes, letting younger voices take the spotlight. On this particular morning, she sat on her porch swing, shadow beside her, watching as a school bus pulled up at the park entrance. Children poured out, supervised by teachers who led them toward the memorial. "They come every week now," Marlene remarked to Shadow, whose muzzle had grown increasingly gray over the past year. "Different schools, different children, but they all want to hear the story." Shadow's tail thumped lazily against the swing, his eyes still alert despite his advancing age. The Veterans Day ceremony that afternoon was modest by national standards, but significant for Willow Creek. Marlene had declined numerous invitations to speak at larger events in Washington and New York, preferring to host her own gathering for the families of forgotten soldiers. A small stage had been set up near the monument, with chairs arranged on the lawn. Lou Ramirez, now running a sanctuary for disabled veterans and service animals on the outskirts of town, coordinated the event with military efficiency. "They're asking again if you'll speak," Lou told Marlene as they reviewed the program. Marlene shook her head. "No speeches, just the reading of the names." Lou nodded, understanding her friend's preference for substance over ceremony. "The general public arrives at 2, family members and veterans at 1 for the private ceremony." As the families gathered, widows, children, parents of those affected by Project Sentinel, Marlene greeted each one personally, Shadow faithfully at her side. For many, this was their first opportunity to meet the woman who had finally brought them answers after years of confusion and loss. "My husband always said something wasn't right about his illness," an elderly woman told Marlene, clutching a framed photograph of a soldier in desert camouflage. "The VA kept saying it wasn't service-connected. He died still trying to prove them wrong." Marlene took the woman's hands in hers. He was right, and now everyone knows it. Across the park, Rick Danner, no longer wearing a police uniform, helped set up chairs with Anna. After the trial, he had resigned from the Willow Creek Police Department, choosing instead to train young recruits in ethics and accountability at the regional academy. "Dad's parole hearing is next month," he mentioned quietly to Anna as they worked. "He's been a model prisoner, teaching GED classes to other inmates." Anna nodded encouragingly. Though Sheriff Danner had been sentenced to 5 years, his cooperation and the circumstances of his final actions had made him eligible for early release. "Are you ready to see him?" "I think so," Rick replied. "We've been writing to each other. It's different now, more honest." Anna squeezed his hand. "That's good." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Whitaker, now retired from the Pentagon and serving on the board of Project Shadow Watch, the non-profit organization that had grown from the events in Willow Creek. The organization advocated for military transparency and whistleblower protections, with Layla Morales heading its investigative journalism division. "Major," Whitaker greeted Marlene warmly. "Everything looks wonderful." "We were late," Marlene replied, a hint of their old military banter in her tone. "But we're here now." The colonel's expression grew solemn. "The president signed the Blackstorm Veterans Relief Act this morning. Full compensation for all affected service members and their families, lifetime medical care, educational benefits for their children. It won't bring back the dead," Marlene observed. "No," Whitaker agreed, "but it acknowledges them, makes their sacrifice official." As the ceremony began, Marlene took her place with Shadow beside the monument. She had chosen not to speak, but her presence was speech enough, a living reminder of persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. The reading of names began, each one followed by the gentle toll of a bell. Shadow sat attentively throughout, as if standing guard over the memory of those being honored. Later that afternoon, as the public ceremony concluded, a more intimate gathering took place under an ancient oak tree on Marlene's property. Rick and Anna had chosen this spot for their wedding, simple, meaningful, and away from public attention. Marlene's backyard had been transformed with wildflowers and simple white chairs, Shadow serving as ring bearer with the band secured to a special collar. "I never thought I'd find happiness after everything," Rick confessed to Marlene as they watched Anna greet guests. "You gave me that chance." "You gave yourself that chance," Marlene corrected gently, "by choosing what was right over what was easy." After the ceremony, as twilight settled over Willow Creek, Marlene sat alone on her porch, Shadow's head resting on her lap. The old dog's loyalty had never wavered through all the years of hiding, fighting, and finally, vindication. In the distance, she could see the lights of Lou's Veterans Sanctuary flickering on. The facility, funded largely by donation drives sparked by the viral videos of Marlene's arrest, had become a haven for disabled soldiers and their service animals. Already it had helped dozens of veterans find purpose and healing. Colonel Whitaker's car pulled up in her driveway one last time before he headed back to Washington. He joined her on the porch, respectfully petting Shadow. "We were late," he said, echoing her earlier words. "But we're here now." Marlene nodded, understanding the weight of his statement. "Better late than never, James." As Whitaker departed, Marlene noticed a school bus stopping at the Memorial Park. Despite the late hour, a teacher was leading a small group of children to read the names on the monument. Even now, the story continued to touch lives. The formal government apology to Marlene and the surviving members of her unit had come 3 months after the trial, a ceremony at the Pentagon where the Secretary of Defense had personally acknowledged the injustice done to them. She had donated the substantial settlement to build a civil rights legal clinic in Willow Creek, ensuring that others with less resources could still find justice. Shadow stirred, his ears perking up at a sound only he could hear. Despite his age, his senses remained sharp, a testament to his training and the bond he shared with Marlene. "It's all right, old friend," she murmured, stroking his graying fur. "We're home now." As darkness fell completely, Marlene gazed up at the stars, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. From a young woman fighting to prove herself in a world that doubted her, to a major commanding elite forces, to a recluse guarding dangerous secrets, and finally to a vindicated whistleblower whose story had changed countless lives. Shadow nestled closer, his warm presence a reminder of the one constant through all those changes: loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between two beings who recognized something essential in each other. "They wanted him to attack me," Marlene whispered, echoing the words that had ended her testimony in court. "Instead, he remembered who I was." Shadow looked up at her, eyes reflecting understanding beyond what most would attribute to a dog. In that gaze was the story of their journey, not just of one woman and her dog against a system determined to silence them, but of all those who stand firm when truth becomes inconvenient, when power attempts to override principle. As the memorial lights illuminated the names of those they had fought for, Marlene Jefferson and Shadow kept their quiet vigil, guardians of a legacy that would continue long after them. A legacy of courage, of persistence, and of the difference one unwavering spirit can make against the darkest odds. What would you risk to stand against corruption when the system itself is designed to silence you? If Marlene's story of courage touched your heart, like, subscribe, and share to support more powerful narratives of everyday heroes who refuse to back down.